Welcome to Literally Books, the podcast. I'm Lindsay,
My name is Magda.
and today we are going to be talking about Ehigbor Okosun's Forged by Blood, the first book of the Tainted Blood duology.
This was such a random coincidence. We met Egbert during the Texas Book Festival when we went to say hello to Abigail Owen, who is the writer for the games God's Play. And it was an amazing coincidence. I cannot wait to talk to her about this book. It was such a fun read. I cannot wait. So
Yes, we
good.
will be capping out this episode with an interview with Ehi herself. Um, she
Sorry.
is
Giving you
a
all
little
the
surprise,
introduction.
little surprise there. So we're gonna give you just a really brief summary. We're gonna try and keep the spoilers to a minimum. But we're really excited about this book, and it's a lovely addition to the romantasy genre.
Yeah, it has a really unique point of view. So I
Yeah.
really love that. I think it's something that we haven't seen before. So I can wait for us to talk more about it.
But before we get started, what are you reading, Magda?
Okay, Lindsay, I did it during the holiday break. I actually finished reading Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton, and I cannot wait for the movie. It is a fantastic sci fi read. It is super quick and easy. It was just great. I cannot wait to see Robert Pattinson in this movie. It comes out in April. The main synopsis of this book is that it deals with somebody, the human race is trying to find like other places of like planets for them to kind of inhabit after pretty much planet Earth kind of gets destroyed. A perfectly normal sci-fi topic.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting about this is that when they send a crew to explore each of these planets, they have somebody that is an expendable that is supposed to be like they're supposed to be doing the dangerous jobs. And what happens here is that this guy kind of, if he dies outside, they just clone him and then he comes back. And this person keeps dying over and over again as they're doing all of these dangerous jobs. I'm not going to say anything else because I don't want to spoil it, but it was such a fun read. I cannot wait. I'm actually pushing my husband to read it because I think he's going to absolutely love this. But
Okay,
yeah.
so clarify for me too. Is the book Mickey 17 or Mickey 7? I know that they have slightly different names between the book and the movie.
Yeah. So the name of the book is Mickey 7 and the name of the movie is Mickey 17.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah, I
very
know. I was
excited.
really confused. And I think in our last episode, when we were talking about it, or one of the episodes that we talked about the books that we wanted to read or what we were most looking forward to next year, I said the name of the book was Mickey 17. It's just, it gets really
It's
confusing and I
confusing.
wasn't sure.
Change. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's relevant.
Yeah. But I'm
Okay.
excited. I think you might actually really enjoy this. And it was such a quick read. It was just great. And then the last one that I also read that I absolutely loved over the break was The Lost Bookshop by L.V. Woods, which is a magical realism story all around this magical bookshop that kind of pops in and out when people most need it. And it kind of takes place, the story, in two different timelines. Like one happens in the 1920s and the other one happens in present time. And you can kind of find like how this story from both of these people's point of view kind of merges and kind of goes into this beautiful magical realism story. It was just beautiful read. I loved it. I think if you love the Midnight Library, you're gonna absolutely love this book. It was just fantastic.
You always have us covered with our cozy reads. Like if I need a book that's going to fill my spirit after a hard day, I need to come to you.
Yeah, it was like I think you would love it. Like I think this one is the one
Mm.
that I'm 100% sure that I think you will like it. And if you don't, then I need to put my foot in my mouth.
No, I like whimsy in a book. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily like a cozy book. But if it's like a little bit like whimsical, then I'm into
Hmm.
it. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it.
it has a little bit of a woo woo element to it.
Love
So it
woo woo.
was,
Yeah, right up
yeah, it
my.
was so fun. It was so fun. But yeah, that's it. What about you? What have you been reading?
So I'm finishing up Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors after reading Cleopatra and Frankenstein.
How was
Um,
it?
I'm actually I shouldn't say I'm finishing up. I'm about halfway through. There are things about it that I really love. It talks about sister dynamics. It follows four sisters, the Blue Sisters. One of whom has just recently passed away, and it follows the other three sisters' lives, kind of handling their grief and the ways in which they have, sort of handled it differently or branched off into their own lives. I like that element of it. There are things about it that I don't love. Something that really bothers me in books is when they only call out race when it's not a white person. Like, I think that's like a very problematic thing. And it happens multiple times in this book. And I just want to be like, do you know what? An editor didn't like move you around that? It really makes me crazy. And so it's the thing that's sort of like keeping me from loving it. But the writing is good. Anyway.
Interesting. And this book was highly praised last year. Like I think
Mhm.
he was like in the short list for a whole bunch of awards. He was in the best of like Barnes and Noble, Amazon. So maybe once you finish it, maybe it'll pay off.
And then the other thing that I'm reading, that we're both reading, I know we're both reading this, is we're rereading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame.
Yes, yes.
That's a
Well,
big sigh.
I finished reading Fourth Wing, and which was I love that book. That's such a great book.
Yeah.
Iron Flame is the one that I'm like dreading a little bit because it was a lot longer.
Okay, so I'm rereading Fourth Wing right now too. You're ahead of me a little bit, but I'm really enjoying the reread. I forgot how much I find the book really pulls you in with the various events at Basgiath. I'm having the same fear about Iron Flame. Like I'm just not looking forward to reading it. So we'll see how we go, but we've got a lot more to come this month related to the Empyrean series. So
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'm excited. I think it's gonna be fun.
we're gonna make it
Whether we
fun.
like the book or
We're
not,
gonna
I
make
think
it
the
fun. Yeah,
event
we're
is gonna be really
yeah.
fun.
We're giving the tea regardless.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
okay, should we take a little break and go to book news?
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome back. We're gonna get into this week's book news. Magda, you want to get us started?
So, Sarah Jessica Parker has been set as a judge for the Booker Prize. So, what this entails is that over the next 7 months, the panel of judges will be required to read approximately 150 novels before they whittle it down to their favorites, down to a long list of 12 or 13 titles, which will be unveiled in July. The winner of the Booker Prize is going to be receiving $64,000 in cash prize, and all of the finalists receive about $3,200. The Booker Prize is considered fiction's most prestigious award and has been running for over 50 years. Way
That's
to
over
go, Sarah.
20 books a month.
That's a lot,
That's a
right?
lot of books.
I didn't know that she was like a big reader. Like I was so surprised to see her kind of selected as a judge, but she must be a really big fan to be reading to be committing herself to this.
Okay, our next story is regarding an upcoming adaptation. Christopher Nolan will be remaking The Odyssey. The Odyssey is a classic piece of literature by Homer that's divided between 24 different books, preceded by the Iliad, of course. It tells the 10-year journey of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, as he travels home after the Trojan War. It has a couple of confirmed cast members, including Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o, Robert Pattinson, and Charlize Theron, and it is set to release July 17th, 2026.
I'm actually looking forward to this adaptation. I think Christopher Nolan has done such a great job with this type of like really complex topics. So I'm curious to see how this turns out. I do remember reading the Iliad when I was in high school, and that was not a fun read. So
I also
we'll
didn't
see.
find it fun at all. I read the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're very long. I think this is going to be an epic, but Christopher Nolan does do epics quite well. And that cast, I don't know if you saw the pictures of Tom Holland from his recent photo shoot. Woo! I was like, okay, Zendaya. I never really understood that pairing because Zendaya is a goddess divine. She is perfection incarnate. I love her so much. And I was like, Tom Holland, like he seems like nice. I don't know. And I saw those pictures. I was like, okay, yes, I understand. We've
She
understood.
she was right all along. We knew it. And we've
She
been
knew.
having I don't know if you guys have heard of this, and Lindsay, feel free to cut this out, but we've been having this discussion behind, with our friends is like who is the hottest like Gen Zer right now, and we hadn't been able to come up with one. And I think after seeing the pictures of Tom Holland, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's it. I get it. He's nice. He's like really loves Zendaya and he's hot. Okay, he's sold.
He is, and his absolute adoration for her. Like he recently did an interview about why he doesn't come to her red carpet events, and he goes, because if I was there, then it'd be about us and our relationship and me. And he was like, these events are for her, so I don't go because they're supposed to be. It should be focused on her. And I was like, I'm gonna cry. Like that's so
Yeah.
supportive. I love it.
Well, and did you hear the comment that he made about like that once he has kids, like he's no longer gonna act because he's gonna stay home and raise the kids? I was like, oh my god, look at this young guy. He
I mean,
gets
let's be
it.
real. He's wealthy. He's gonna have help, but I still love it. We love that.
Yeah. Oh god.
And let's be real, like she's the more talented one, so that's how it should be. Like
Yeah.
she's amazing. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
I
What's
love
what's
it.
on our what's next on our docket?
Outside of our love for Tom Holland now.
Mhm.
All right. And then last but not least, libraries are offering free health and wellness classes across the US. They're offering fitness classes, food pantries, cooking classes, conversation about loneliness and mental health, and even blood pressure monitors that can be checked out just like books. The public health programs leverage the library's reputation as sources of reliable information and their ability to reach people beyond informal healthcare settings. No money, insurance, language skills, or ID are required, and there's no limit on age. So that's kind of like an amazing service now that are being kind of partnered across all of the US with their public libraries. So feel free to go check them out.
Libraries are supplementing absolutely every aspect of life right now. Like, can we just talk about how we don't deserve libraries? It is one of those beautiful institutions that exists to just make people better for the sake of making people better. I can't get over it.
It's amazing. Like I mean, like, do you have an idea? I remember like having to go with my mom late at night and trying to buy like a blood pressure thing, and they're expensive, like especially if you're kind of struggling. So just for them to be offering this type of service where you could just go and check them, because if you need to kind of check your blood pressure constantly,
Mhm.
it's incredible. I
Incredible.
love it. Yeah,
Go get a
it's great.
library card. All right, should we take a little break?
Yep, let's do it.
Welcome back. We are going to get into the first book of the Tainted Blood duology overview. Before we get to talk to the book's author, Ehigbor Okosun, I'm going to give us a quick summary and then we're going to go through our thoughts. There might be minor spoilers here, so just be aware of that. And just to give you a quick overview, Demi, an Alusho or magic user, must navigate a harsh and dangerous existence when her mother is brutally murdered for using her powers to heal a young boy, Jonas, even though magic has been banned in the kingdom of Ife by the Age, or non magical people led by Alistair Sorensen. 9 years after her mother's death, Demi has rebuilt her life and honed her own magical skills thanks to the help of her chosen family, including Will and Nana, and her closest friends, Colin and Amara. She is recruited by Lord Aquenzi to assist in kidnapping the crown prince so that Aquenzi can safely return him to Sorensen, with the goal of earning a royal appointment as a means of making positive change for the Alusho people. Demi agrees, and with Colin's help, they embark on a perilous journey as a first step toward change. Okay, so with that very long explanation, and I only covered like a quarter of it, Magda, what were your high level thoughts on this book?
I loved it. I think we might have talked about this earlier in this episode, where I think that this book gives us like a very unique point of view into what a romantasy should look like. It's not just like your stereotypical young people that are just kind of fighting demons just for the sake of it. I think there's a lot of complex history, like familial history that goes into this. There's a lot of talks about politics, race, and it's like a really good topic for like just now, like today's society. And I think like we're gonna ask Ava, right? Like when we talk to her, but like I think it just kind of made you think a lot about the way that we kind of learn about our history, how sometimes it can be manufactured. We learn about how we treat others. I don't know. I just overall I thought it was a really great read, and I didn't know what to expect going into when reading this, and I loved it. What about you?
I think the same. I think Ehigbor did something that I have not seen in a lot of romantasy novels. Maybe that's not fair. I think she did it in a unique way, which is that she sets up stakes that are so prescient, so real, so current. Like Magda said, a lot of the structure of the book is sort of swirling around the conversation of colonialism and the impact of colonialism through the lens of its impact on magic in this world. And it's it's a very beautiful way to talk about the absolutely damaging effects of losing a culture once someone is colonized. And so I was so impressed by the breadth and the depth of this book. I loved it.
And I think something that this book made me think a lot about our main character Demi, who later on she's 18 years old. She has this innate feeling of trying to save everybody, which
Mm.
at times I might have found frustrating, but it kind of made me think like I'm in the wrong here. Like I need to stop being kind of agreeing with the status quo of things, and like that's what she's trying to stop. She wants to stop like the things as they're going and being okay with it just so she doesn't get in trouble. um she just like wants to be able to save everybody as much as they can regardless of who they are, and that's something that when I was reading it, it was a little bit like, oh my gosh, this girl's gonna get in trouble again because she wants to save people. But ultimately, that's who she is. Like, she wants to be that person that wants to save everybody. Like, she wants to be the person that doesn't want to leave anybody behind. And it just kind of speaks to her character quite well.
Yeah, something I love about Demi is that she really embodies this ideal around the dangers of being complacent. Because
Hmm.
one of the effects of the Age outlawing magic in this world is that Alusho, magical people, have a lot of value. So when they're useful to the non magical people, then they want to sort of own that power. And so they do that, as Magda mentioned, through basically enslaving them. So they buy and sell young magical children for shows or for healing purposes. Yetunde, Demi's mother, is a healer, and that's ultimately how she meets Ionis, the other main character, and then is killed for using her magic when it becomes inconvenient. And so I think what Demi's role in a lot of this is to say like you can't just accept, you can't do nothing when you see what's going on. She saves two young children. And it's really her way of saying, like, I'm not going to get used to the wrongness of this, even though it's a societal norm. It will never be a norm for me, and it can be hard to watch because she's reckless. You're like, oh my gosh, like, and I love it because I think it speaks to her really large need to have allies. And I think one of the other themes in this book is the idea of like chosen family and how these allies really show up to keep her safe in moments where she would otherwise be completely overwhelmed when she's taking these huge risks.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that was something that I found so beautiful about the magical community is that we live in this world where, well, they live in this world. I
We lived
wish
in
I
it. We were
did.
in it. We were in it.
I know,
That's how
we were
into it
in
we
it. That's right. We were
were.
visiting it. But, they lived in this world where there were magical beings all around them, spiritual beings. And there was this really big perception for them that they needed to use their magic for good. Because if they were using their magic for nefarious reasons, they could potentially be taking their magic away. So they had to live to this sort of standard of like ethics that was significantly better than non-magical people because they needed to protect what made them special. And I just found it to be really beautiful how like there were spiritual beings around them kind of that were kind of witnesses to how the magical beings were behaving. And I thought that was really cool because it just kind of kept in check I don't know, the code of ethics for them
That
in a
is
way, in a
such a
sense.
that's a really good call out, and I think that's a big change from standard kind of romantasy magic systems is that a lot of other books use an ambivalent magic system. So there's good magic and bad magic, and there is maybe to some extent in this, but like a big portion of the first book is that exactly what you're talking about, Magda, which is there is an encoded set of ethics and altruisms around the ability to leverage magic that you don't see in a lot of other books, and it makes it really it's a beautiful it makes you allied with Demi immediately.
Exactly. And like it just made them I don't know, just more careful. And I think maybe
Mm.
that's why, like Demi, like what you mentioned earlier, like she wanted to help everybody because she wanted to conserve the parks. I think they do mention pretty early in the book that the number of magical beings has been decreasing over time, just due to multiple aspects of it. So for them, it's so important to protect what makes them special.
It's such a good point, and it gives
Oh,
stakes. It gives stakes to her using magic.
exactly. One of the things too, I don't know, this world is so rich, and I think what's something that Aber does so great is that she gave us a full-on map of like where everything takes place. She gave us a character list. Thank you, Lord, for this. Like I loved it so much. Actually, no, thank you, Aber, for this. This was so great and so helpful, and we get to meet so many magical creatures too. And I just thought sometimes when you're doing world building, it can be like really exhausting. And like this world is really rich. There's like a story behind every single character and creature that we meet, but it doesn't make it exhausting. And I love that so much. It did such a great job at balancing the richness of the story versus keeping it nice and like palatable for the reader.
Yeah, and I think the way that she does that is elements of the plot that leverage magic. She doesn't immediately explain what the magic is. The plot just sort of unfolds, and then when she talks about the magic later, it's used to say sort of explain a plot point more fully. So, like, when we don't get an explanation of how Demi escapes after her mother is murdered, but
Mhm.
later on in the book, her method of escape is a critical explanation for the magic system in the book. And so it feels like a payoff when you're learning something, and that is hard to do, and Eibor does it so well.
Maybe that's why like we loved or I loved like a lot of dark matter or
Yeah.
those type of sci-fi books that they're heavy sci-fi books, but it's counting that the reader is going to be able to kind of get that payoff and that they're going to be able to understand what's going on in the story. Like they're not dumbing it down for us too much, and I love that.
Okay, do you wanna talk about a little bit about the love triangle?
Let's do it. There is something that I think it's very common in this book that we have in other romantic books, which is the idea of mates. But I really love the way that like Aber kind of talks about it. But I think kind of going back to Lindsay's point, we have a little bit of a love triangle between Demi, Colin, who is, as Lindsay mentioned in her summary, her childhood really good friend that she's kind of grown up and been brought up with. And then we have this new character, Jonas, who we get to meet really early on into the story. And Jonas is the young boy that like her mother heals earlier in the book, and he's also the boy that Lord Equency kind of asked Demi to kidnap in order to kind of save all magical beings in the future. So we kind of get into this journey with both Colin, Jonas, and Demi, and this kind of creates this like love triangle in a sense. Colin and Demi were supposed to kind of be together just because they kind of grew up. So it just kind of creates this like love triangle between the three of them. So we have the person that's been at Demi's side since she's been raised for the past 9 years, and then this new person that's just kind of coming in that also has like really good intentions with Demi as well. Uh,
Yeah, and I think there's also this push-pull of, like, culturally, Jonas and Demi are very different. Like, we know that Jonas comes from, like, a wealthy family from the very beginning of the book when he's getting healed. He, comes from a non-magical family, whereas Colin is a magical being. He's a Lucio. He is raised with Demi, and so there's always it's sort of like in Fourth Wing, right? Where it's like Colin is a bit of our Dane, and Jonas is our Xaden, although I don't know. It's the structure is very different, but like, you're like, I'm not sure who to root for because they have this. I actually hate that I just compared it to Fourth Wing because the dynamics are very different. Like, you like Colin and you like Jonas.
yeah.
They represent very different things to Demi, and I think that always makes for a good plot.
hmm Yeah, I think she did such a good job with it too because she made although our characters are pretty young, they're like 18, 19-year olds.
Hmm.
They don't come across as utterly immature. I think they come across sometimes as naive in the way that they want to fight like the power, I guess, but like they don't come across as immature, and I think it's probably a condition as a result of the way that they were kind of had to be raised and grow up because they kind of grew up in such like intense, at least for Colin and for Demi, right? Like they were kind of brought up in like a world that is kind of persecuting them, so they are kind of really self-aware of like how they need to be able to act so they can kind of survive in the world. And I thought that was like really wonderful. Like we don't get that immaturity that sometimes comes across in other romantasy novels.
Clap, clap, applause. Absolutely true. So true. Any last things that you want to chat about before we get into our interview with Aibor?
Not really. I think I'm just really excited to see the second book, to see kind of where the story takes us. I think it does leave in a little bit of a cliffhanger on the first book, and I cannot wait to see what the journey is for our three main characters. What about you?
Same feeling. I think the book, I mean, there are so many things that we couldn't get into in the scope of this short conversation that we'll talk a little bit with Abor about during our interview, but everyone should go and read it. The first book, it really does a beautiful job of setting up the magic system, but I still have a ton of questions and I think there's a lot of plot to unfold in the second book. So I agree with you. I'm just super excited to read it.
Yeah, such a great find. Yay!
Yay. All right, do you want to take a little break and then we'll come back with our interview?
Let's do it.
Welcome back to Literally Books, the podcast. We are here with Ehigbor Okosun to talk about her wonderful book, Forged by Blood, which is the first book of the Tainted Blood duology. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. Oh,
Woo!
yes, books,
We have to show off this
notes.
beautiful cover because it's like one of my favorite things. I have the second book behind me, which is also very beautiful for anyone watching this. You have to get them together because they are beautiful trophies on the shelf. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to talk. So we are just talking about the very first book, but I do want to call out that this is a duology, and it'll leave you satisfied, but there is a cliffhanger, and we are definitely going to be talking about the second book at some point because I have so many questions. But just to start us out, we want to chat a little bit about you. And this is a question that we ask everyone that comes on the show, which is, what is the book that made you a reader? Or if nothing comes to mind, what's the last book you'd read that you'd recommend to a non-reader?
Oh God. So technically, I have a very specific answer for what is the book that made me a reader, but it's
I love it.
cheating. It's
No,
cheating because I
cheats.
read that book when I was 2.
No, we want
Um,
that. We want that. I feel like it's so telling to know what is the formative book for people.
oh God. So the first book I read, there's a picture of me doing this. I was about 2 years old. I picked up The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which is supposed to be like a British classic, and I
Mhm.
started reading it. And my parents thought maybe I was just like looking at the pages or the words or something. And then I was like asking my mom questions, and then my dad had just come in from like a trip, and so I was like talking to him about the book, and he was just sort of like, what is going on? And so then when my brother did his like school testing for where he was going to end up placement, like what year, when he was starting school, my brother's 3 years. I have a brother who's 3 years older than me, and I have another brother. It's a long family. Um, I went along with him, and I started school along with him because they were like, no, she's reading and she can count to 1,000 and stuff, and we don't know how this happened, but it happened, so here we are. So that was my first book ever.
That's impressive that at 2 years old, you were reading a pretty full complex, Secret Garden. I mean, it's like a young person's book, but it's pretty complex for a 2-year old. That's amazing.
And
I
and
know.
also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
It speaks so much though, because it's also like for me, it's one of those books that's very emotionally traumatic and textured for a child. But I get why you were drawn to it because I love children's books for the exact same reason. It's very telling in your writing that that's where you started.
No, really, like I always was like drawn to like the whimsical and the fantastical, and I didn't really have words for it. Like I read a lot of like Enid Blyton when I got a little bit older because my mom was like, "Oh, I guess since she likes reading books, we're just gonna give her this whole like thing, you know." So they gave me books to read. I read Lorna Doone when I was about 7 years old, and like that broke my heart. Like, oh no, really? Yeah, I have a like. Oh, thank you. Sorry, partner's delivering a. Oh, yes, in
Oh,
my "You Are the
that's
Best"
a
mug.
true partner right
Yes,
there.
let's go.
Love that.
Um, but I read Lorna Doone when I was about 7 years old, and it broke my heart. And later, I had a professor, a teacher, who gave me like one of the first sort of like a 1910s like copy, like one of the very first editions of the book, and like gave it to me as a gift because I was talking about how much that book really like shifted my understanding of what like enduring love like meant. And my teacher was just like, it's so weird talking about enduring love with like a 7-year old, but okay, well, here's a copy of this book or whatever. Um, but yeah, like I read a lot of those books when I was younger, and I really, really like. I think it's especially in like today's world. I think that there's so much. We're so far removed from what people consider like classics, right? And I think actually to a certain extent that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because there's we can question why certain books are thought of as classics, and we can also sort of like take more an objective stance since we've had more distance. But I think also like there are things for what made those some books. I'm not saying about all books, but there are things that made some books like true classics. And I think that there's a misconception that like classics were like super popular in their day, which a lot of them weren't. And a lot of them weren't like, the books that got a lot of attention, but they're the ones that like lasted. And I think that's very interesting to me. Yeah, and yeah, I love books. I Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell I love books. That's all.
I think because you kind of mentioned like what we can kind of consider classics, like what would make a book classic in your book?
Oh, good. But for me in general, I think what makes a good classic, like books that you feel like you can't quite walk away from them. Like you feel like you carry a bit of them with you. So you think about them. You may not think about. You might read the book and be like, "Oh my God," and close it and be like, "Wow." but it could be like 5 years from now, you're sitting down to like a tea with a friend, or you're doing something, or maybe you're picking up your kiddo if you have a kid, and you think of that book and you just think of, wow, I really want to be in that head of the character like right now. And you just, so you just keep sort of being like drawn back to those. And I think also another thing for me that makes a book a great classic is if you revisit that book at different points in your life, and there's still something, there's maybe you're still uncovering something, there's still like layers and levels, and like, and it that just sits with you, like that's what makes it phenomenal and fantastic to me. Ooh,
I love
what
That's
do you say?
that.
It's a perfect answer because we talk about our formative books for each other a lot, and a lot of mine are considered children's books as well. And I reread a lot of them as an adult, and I'm like, wow, there's so much in this that I maybe intuited as a child, but didn't really have any full understanding of. And I think you're kind of getting at that too. It's why I'm very resistant to the idea of like YA, because YA makes it seem like adult readers can't access a storyline, which is absolutely not true.
Yes, absolutely that. No, and I really want to hear what both of your like formative like novels were, but yeah, it's absolutely that, right? Books are worlds, right, that we can fall into. And yeah, like we have this whole thing about like young adult and like who it's written for and all of it. But I think that like there's an adult could pick up a young adult book and find like something that they needed to not just tell their younger self, but their self right now, and then you have like a kid who might be younger than a teen. Like, I mean, a lot of books that were like young adult I read like when I was much younger, like half the age they were meant for. And I'd be like, no, she's not serious. She doesn't really love him. Let's keep going, And it would be like, because kids have ideas about the world, right? And they're exploring and they're experimenting. And also, like, adults forget that, like, as an adult, you should be growing and changing, right? And part of growing and changing is confronting, like, ideas, like, in yourself, in your mind, and outside of yourself. And like that's reading is such an active thing that allows you to keep doing that. And so, like, anyway, but please tell me what your formative novels were. I'm actually very curious.
Mine are Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Like that to me, it was one of those books that like I read them when I was in ninth grade, I believe, or yeah, ninth, 10th grade. And it was just one that just stuck out with me. And it just felt like I was right there in the world. And it just opened up a whole new world for me. Like I think what you just mentioned, like you're just discovering this magical world. And the first book is still has like a nice little cheeriness to it. Like, they kind of get darker as you kind of go along.
Oh,
But it was just so beautiful. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is what books are meant to be. Because when I was reading in middle school or high school, they were making us read like more classics, and I'm like, I'm not connecting to any of this. But there's this whole space out there of other books that what you mentioned earlier, there might not be considered classics, but it's what got me into reading. So for me, it may be very basic, but it's something that like really introduced me to reading. And I'm really thankful for that series for that. Because I think it wasn't just me. I think it changed a lot of our trajectory as readers for many of my people
really?
of my generation, I think.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, I don't subscribe to the idea that there's such a thing as like basicness when it comes to like books that you enjoy.
Hmm.
I mean, I read a lot of books, but I also read a lot of like Chinese web novels when I was like growing up, right? And like if you're familiar with like face slapping novels, like that's what they were called back then, and you were just like, like you read like chapter to chapter, and you're like, oh, and it's the kind of thing where like I mean, it's called a face slapping novel, so you know where it's going, and you know kind of what's going to happen with the protagonist, and like is she going to like get past this new obstacle, right? I mean, she is because it's a face slapping novel, right? But you just it keeps your interest, it keeps you wanting to read, right? So I think that Harry Potter was a very foundational novel for a lot of people. And
Hmm.
I know it's like everyone has like complicated feelings right now about like creator, and like so there's so many things there,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's like weird to say that that novel was very foundational for a lot of people, and that novel was the first sort of like fantastical novel that really drew. I mean, it's really like I think about Harry Potter is the same way like Enid Blyton was for people in like the 30s and 40s and 20s, right? Where, you had stories that really focused on children and allowed children to be, the center of a story and to like see the world the way they saw it. Like, I mean, and it's also kind of sort of what Dickens like tries, sort of taps into earlier in his career, where he has like young characters who are like dealing with like real shit. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on air, so I will refrain.
Curse away, we love it.
Yeah.
But like, that actually, versus it always having to be about the life of the mind, or this character in their 20s looking back at the universe and here's their treatise. And anyway, but yes, I love that for you. What about you, Lindsay?
Well, I mean, I will get into this. You've said so many things that I'm like, yes, like one of our central tenets of this podcast is like there are no bad books. There are books that are not in your taste. And we truly I feel like there's a lot of judgment around what is acceptable reading, what's literary reading, what's valuable books. And we truly believe like sometimes you can't read the Iliad over and over again. Like you need something that's palatable to keep you going. So I totally agree with you. No basic books.
I agree with that. As somebody who read the Iliad and the Odyssey in year 7 for fun, when I had a break, and I was like, this is no, okay. So sounds like a tangent, but I've been for the last like several years, I've been following this. I don't know if you ever heard of this, like Epic the Musical. It's the Odyssey. It's like, so Jorge Rivera Erans is this creator who, for the last, like basically since 2020, has been making a musical of the Odyssey, like wrote 40 original songs, like casted, like it's like, it's really amazing. But it was like a project he was doing for school that has like kind of blown up. It's a whole thing. He just dropped the last saga. The songs are so good, and literally like I sit with my partner and we sing to each other like, would you fall in love with me again? Because it's Odysseus and Penelope at the end of all of that being like, would you fall in love with me again despite all this shit I've done? And it's emotional. It's so great, right? But yes, I can love all that and I can still be like, today I feel like reading this novel, about this woman who goes around just, stealing like pool balls from different pool holes because that's what she wants to do. And then she picks a random person in the street to catapult it. Like, I mean, we are varied. Human beings, we are varied. But yes, not to interrupt you, Lindsay. Please go ahead.
Oh, no, you're not. No, they listen to me all the time. This is for you. And I completely agree. And it's funny because you mentioned something else. Like my formative books, the books that I loved when I was a kid were like James and the Giant Peach. I loved Roald Dahl and I loved A Wrinkle in Time. And I could say it's sort of like what you were talking about. A Wrinkle in Time was really important to me. I talk about it to Magda all the time. She's so sick of me giving this rant. But it's exactly what you're talking about. The reason I think I like those books, and I am going to segue this into Forged by Blood too, is because they were stories about kids who had to solve problems and face danger and peril by themselves without the help of adults. And that is really important to a kid because I think life is scary when you're little and you feel like you don't have any control. And I think it's why Magda and I were both really drawn to this book, Forged by Blood, because Demi is very much that character to me, where I feel like, yes, she's going to figure it out. She's going to have help along the way. We all have to have help along the way. But she navigates and continues in a way that is like really inspiring, I think, for a kid and an adult still. It's
No,
still.
I appreciate that. No, I think yeah, it is, to your point, like it is, I think, very, very important, right? It is very important for young people to, oh, did I disappear?
No,
Oh, I'm
I can
I'm
see
still
you.
here. Sorry, for
You're
some
still
Yes.
reason.
here.
Yeah,
We
we
Okay.
can
got
see you.
we got too existential and you just disappeared into the
To the ether.
I am Henri le chat, like les penseurs, like on YouTube, just thinking about the universe. Okay, sorry. Let me go. But I think the thing that we, or really, I think the thing that the publishing industry sort of like has a tenuous relationship with, right, is the idea of like who is the ideal reader, right, for any sort of work, right? And I think there's been sort of a lot of lamenting of our young people reading like serious novels. Are we learning to engage and are we learning to think? And are like critical thinkers and reasoners and all of that? And I think that the way you nurture that is you start with novels that center young people. right? Novels that like show young people having to face and navigate things, and not because actually that is inherently fantastical. I think that they are actually, and part of this for me as a child too, is as a child I had to figure out a lot of stuff for myself, right? I had what I think a lot of people, or what I call a post-colonial upbringing, which a lot of people I think have also had, right? Which is you're not protected as a child the way that you would be if you'd grown up in a different situation or a different sort of like reality, right? But you like I come from like two cultures that were like, or two cultures, let's call it two cultures plus, right? Because we've got varied family history and like all of that is all really varied, right? That like had been through like colonization, had been through like so many things, right? And so my parents didn't really get to be children when they were children, right? They had responsibilities that were like bigger than their years. And to a certain extent, because of that, I didn't really get to be a child in the same way. There are some ways I was really protected and I got to be a child, and there are some ways I did not get to be a child. And there are things like I had to do like really, really well. Like a lot of people are just like, why do you cook so well? And I'm like, well, because I've been cooking since I was 5, right? And they're just sort of like, yeah, you know. Um, but I bring this up to say, being able to see that though in a novel, right, whether you were protected as a child or not, is really important because it speaks to a sense of hope. It speaks to a sense of like resilience of the human spirit, and it speaks to like us considering like what our world like looks like, you know, when we have the things we need and when we don't have the things we need. Like, can we move forward? Can we survive? Can we hope? Can we like have fantasy and adventure and create new worlds, right? Because I think that the deficit answer is to say like no, is to say, you know, anybody who grows up in like certain conditions like cannot thrive, and that is it, right? I think it's certainly harder to thrive, right? But I don't think it's impossible to thrive. It's just harder. But for again people who that wasn't their reality, right? It not only gives them sort of like a window into like, well, you know, life may not be at, or may not be, we may not be starting at the same starting point or the same genesis, right? But it also allows them to consider in their own lives, right? Where are the places where I maybe can be bolder or stronger or do more than I thought I could ever do, right? And how is that going to help not just like me and my community, but how am I going to shift the way the world works, even just that tiny degree? Because I'm believing in a way that maybe I didn't know I could believe before. So that's my whole like long spiel, and I'm now done.
Oh, no, I mean, I I think you can see that in the book as well. I mean, one of the questions that we were gonna talk about with you with Demi is exactly that, right? Like, she has a similarly difficult life. She has she's growing up under incredibly oppressive, you know, conditions, and then she has also a lot of personal tragedies on top of that. But the book is not unjoyful. There is a lot of moments of fun and whimsy, and that's a really hard thing to do. And so I like one of the questions we wanted to ask you is like how do you think why do you think she does keep going? Like what is her draw to sort of find those moments of joy?
Oh god, because at the end of the day, like, she wants to live. You know, at the end of the day, like, I think it's this thing like we talk about a lot, and like now in American society, we you know, it comes up a lot, like during like election year cycles or whatever. No, we're not about to discuss any of that on this podcast. Sorry, but I think there's this. I think that people at the heart of it, like nobody wants to be alone. Like we are well, I mean, introverts, even as much as we enjoy our like personal time, like, you know, human beings are we are inherently like community oriented, we're inherently social. And I think that even in the darkest of times, like we a lot of us like we look for things to hold on to, you know, we externalize our hopes, right? And it could be something like a little dog who comes into your yard, you know, every day, and you look forward to seeing it, even though you're like, oh, I could never, I don't know if I could ever afford a dog or something like that, right? Or it could be like the flower that you watch like growing through the fence, that you're like, this is the one thing, you know. I think Demi is a character who her very heart like loves life and is always looking to see like the best of it, even when it doesn't always show her its best, right? And that's something that like her mother nurtures when she's very young, and her mother keeps telling her these stories of their history and their people, and keeps trying to keep that flame alive in her, right? So that even when things become hard or heartbreaking later, she's able to like hold on to those pieces, and she's able to say like, well, she believed, so I can believe, right? And if I can believe, then even if this looks impossible, it's still navigable, even if I like, man, I'm so like, I just want to blow everything up, right? Maybe there are people not like people worth not blowing up, right? And I think also like at the same time, like Demi is young, and she, like when you're a young person, like you see the world differently, right? And there's still like there's still people you meet that feel like question marks, like you don't have everything like completely figured out, and so there's still room for like joy, right? And you can say like, well, there's also room for chaos, because people you meet who are question marks could not be good for you, but they could be or they couldn't be, you never know, right? But she still very much like has that core of her intact, and because of that she's able to do the things that she does, and she's able to give people chances even when they don't deserve those chances, right? And that, I think, that is a theme you see like throughout book one, right? And then in book two it's more like she questions, have I gone too far, right? Have I spent a lot of time trying to see the best in people, when really all I need to do is say, you know what, it's over for all of you. So
I love that so much because like I think when I was talking to Lindsay about the book, one of the things that it was a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but I think it was just something that I found myself that I'm like, I'm not like Demi because I feel like I'm not as willing to help as many people as she is, where she's putting her life in danger for people that she doesn't know. And at times I'm like, girl, what are you doing? You need to get away from this situation. But that just kind of speaks to her character of how like strong and how much of a better human she is than like me as a person that is in my late 30s, like she's young and sometimes you need that to be a little bit naive to put yourself at risk because there's going to be a potential higher reward if you do that. So it was so great to kind of see her journey go through that. So I'm interested to see in the second book how her opinion and thoughts change on that.
oh, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. Because so one of the things like I really wanted to capture in Forged by Blood was uh I really think, because going back to what I was saying earlier about like the post-colonial upbringing, right? A lot of people like who recent immigrants, like you'll see the same kind of like energy from them, right? Of you got to give, give, give. You have to like do, 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 do. It's like a very do or die, right? And so there's sort of like not room sometimes to think about like, oh, resting or relaxing or whatever, right? So Demi kind of comes in with that same energy where she's just like, I have to be the person who's going to be the somebody, because if I wait for somebody to come save me, nobody's going to come, right? And so she's afraid that there's going to be nobody in the situation and who's going to help, and so sometimes like she does things that you're like, why are you doing this? Like literally there's I had actually so much fun writing this scene, but there's a point in book one where Demi is given very clear instructions to do one thing, and she goes in and she's like, no, I'm gonna get everybody out. And then you're like, girl, if you don't. And then it's like when she turns around and you're like, you know uh she's in a situation you're like, this all could have been avoided if but it's also like, I think the great thing about it too though is it brings up these questions about how are we taught to value, how do we value life even in dire situations, right? Because she's somebody who's like at all costs values, right? So she's just sort of like, it doesn't matter, like I have to, right?
Yeah.
But then in book two, you deal with like the fallout of all of that, right? Because nobody can actually carry all that for forever, right? You deal with her coming to a place where she's a year older. She's past like a lot of the things where she could say like I was younger, I was a child or whatever. It's sort of like that ship has sailed, and now she has to kind of stand in her own as a young woman and realize that like, man, sometimes revolution ain't it's not gorgeous, it's not pretty, it might require doing some things that you don't want to do, but can you do those things, and can you stand by them, right? And that's ooh, ooh, all I'm saying is she had a villain era drop for book two.
I cannot wait.
Okay, we're still in the uptick arc too, because I mean, Demi in book one of my favorite things about her is like her refusal to accept things that should not be acceptable. Like she's like, I won't, this cannot be the norm no matter what. And it's hard to watch because you're like, oh no, but like maybe two more minutes of thought should have gone into this plan because you are putting yourself in peril danger, you know, every other chapter. But it is part of the reason I think you get her, you know, and sometimes when you watch these younger characters make bad decisions that you make in youth, it's hard to read them because you're like, no, girl, like this is not what we should be doing. But with her, you really root for her because you're like, right, she should be saving to enslaved children with no backup or way to get them out or support for where to put them. Like you want that for her. And so it's a good balance, but then I think Magda, you know, remarked on this, and she'll probably ask you more about it. But like the secondary characters are that balance, right? You have like Will and Nana who are like, no, 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 we must, we must also be safe. So let's, you know, it's funny to see the community sort of come together to represent like different people on their arc here to say like, well, yes, but everything comes with a cost. It's you know,
I mean,
great.
yeah, everybody's just like, hello, Demi. I mean, even a Quincy is like, uh, so this is cute, but you know, and Demi's just like, stop. You can't tell me what to do, and you're all like, all right, we're gonna see how this turns out.
But and you know, honestly, I think Demi, I think the way that she was written, I think it kind of gives me the impression that it speaks more about who you are as a person and as a writer, right? Because to kind of what Lindsay mentioned earlier, Demi wants to save everybody, all of the secondary characters, and you put a lot of thought into developing all of these characters. I mean, like, thank you so much. You did like a whole character, like glossary in the back, where we pretty much get to know a little bit of background on all of these characters, regardless of how much like book time they get in the book, right? Like you're taking the time, kind of indicating that every person matters and they have their own story. So I'm kind of curious, like, how you went about that, because it's something that we don't really get to see in very many books, like that care in giving a backstory to all of these characters.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I can say confidently that that is a thing that will show up in all of my work, all of it. Because yeah, I know, really, I just finished something that I turned into my editor on Monday. And yeah, oof, that one is a ride. It is a dark adult book. It is dark. It is fantasy. It is maybe romantasy. I don't know. You're gonna have to read and see. It's not that I don't know. Like it is definitely dark romantasy, but but it's the kind of thing where for me that's how the world works, right? For me, I think about things like say for example you are in queue at a shop or something, and it feels like the cashier is like really rude to you, right? It could be like I could just think about it about like, oh wow, this person is just really rude, or it could be like maybe this person just got the worst news of their life, or maybe this person like doesn't know that they're coming off as rude, they have RBF, and they're like really really hungry. It could be a lot of different things, right? And so um I try to, with how I move through the world, try to think about that, all right, and think about like I would want somebody to give me a shot, even if like I'm hungry and coming off a certain way at a certain time, right? So, I think about people in that same way too, right? As in like, well, I've only just met you once, I can't come to a conclusion about who you are as a person, right? And I think about that when I'm writing fiction, when I'm working on characters, is I don't see people as just like, oh, this is just somebody who just walked by on the street. I see them as like, this is somebody who has a story, who has a history, who has and like the way they think, the way they move the world is going to affect how they interact, right? And so it's never as simple as um this person is just a villain or this person is just a hero. There's always like stuff, there's reasons, and like there's, and I mean sometimes, I mean, you can have sociopaths that can have reasons that we don't need to know, right? Because you're like, thanks for that sociopathy, we do not need to know your reasons, like you're just not a good person, right? um but I think that it's really important for me in fiction to show that, because like I think that will encourage my readers as well to sort of like make those considerations, right? And think about how, somebody could be, and it's not just like necessarily people being rude to you or like something like that, right? It could be like that kind of thinking like encourages them to see people as like full, like a multitude rather than just like a fixed reality. And I think that's like especially important, not just for young people but for adults as well, because we all get into these places where we tend to like follow our routines and our habits, and like our brain like operates on heuristics, and so we take the shortest path to come to a conclusion, right? So you walk by and you're like, this cashier is a total like witch, and you just move on, right? And that affects like how we see the world, right? It can make us withdraw from the world a bit more. It can make us like not really interact with what is really in front of us. It can make us begin to think like, that things are hopeless and can never be changed. But I don't know. It's hard for me to see the world that way, right? Because if I did, like, I wouldn't write. There are all these statistics coming out every day about, how much so much work that we still have to do, representation with like the way we like look at ourselves, the way we talk about women, just like so much.
Mhm.
But I think that the fact that like you still have varied women fighting in this industry for more is like a sign of like hope, and it's a sign of like it is resistance, right? It is us saying like, okay, well, we see the statistics coming out, we see all of these stuff happening, but it doesn't have to be this way. And I want to change the world just this little bit so that maybe the next generation won't have to fight just as like even as hard as I've had to. You know what I mean? So yeah, all that to say, like throughout all my work, you will see characters that are like that, right? If you think it's if you think like in book one that you got to see secondary characters, in book two you get to explore more of what some of the secondary characters, what their backgrounds were, like how they came to, like how this whole world and all this crisis came to be. And um yeah, like book two has a prologue, y'all. Haha, I love prologues. um and then also in this next work that I've been toiling away at, giving all my time to, um, it's a shift in perspective, because it's third person, but it follows multiple characters. And so you very much get to see like an expanded world, and you get interesting like secondary and tertiary characters that like add to the full story. Yay, I said that without spoiling anything.
You did amazing.
But you piqued our interest, and now I would like that book immediately. Please and thank you.
And I think just with that, like I think it's not just the characters, but I think you also kind of play quite a bit with like historical events of things that have happened in real life, and like kind of putting some parallels within this book, which is kind of amazing. Like one of my favorite quotes is like I'm just gonna read it to you because that way I don't mess it up. But my favorite moment is when there's like this new decree where the Oluso can no longer be hunted or sold, and those who have been bought by others or forced into servitude must be freed immediately. And I kind of laughed out loud with the response after this decree came out, which was Lady Anne, and she was like, "But the economy," and I just I laughed and I'm like, I shouldn't be laughing because this is like a parallel in real life and a commentary of like what marginalized communities, in particular during slavery, went through. And I just love that so much because you made it so lighthearted, but it was so perfect timing. And you're kind of like calling out all of these history events into the book. And I'm wondering, like, were there anything else that you kind of were making some commentaries based on like historical events that maybe have happened, and you're kind of like interweaving through the story that we maybe might have missed?
there are a lot of things, but um I make it a rule to um okay, so when I'm writing, I have what I call a murder board, which is basically like, if you ever watch one of
We
those
all know
shows.
exactly what you're instant
Exactly, right?
imagery.
Yeah.
Red
Um
string, yes.
and which is really funny because I have another book that is a thriller mystery that has a murder board that is also really intense. But there are things that I'm referencing that um I will neither confirm nor deny. That is my whole, like, I stand on that. And the reason why is I think that people bring their own things to the work. Like, I think that the act of reading is an act of communion between like writer and reader. And that people bring, there's a really great, I think, quote about this by Ken Liu, I believe, that like reading a book is like going to a hotel, right? You bring your baggages to the hotel and you put them down and then you check into your room, right? And your experience is your experience, right? And so there are things that are laid out in the hotel that you will feel like, oh my God, they knew that I needed this hand towel. They knew I needed this like onsen, they knew I loved like these kinds of pillows, right? But there will be other things that you'd be like, oh man, can't believe they didn't like stock my favorite blanket or like that kind of thing, right? So there are many things that many references I will make in my work. However, I will neither confirm nor deny what those references are, except in private. And I just keep that again, just to give people room to interpret and to see things that they want to see, right? Because I think that one of the things I've thought a lot now, as an adult, is there's so much scholarship on like work that I loved when I was younger. But I think that a lot of times the scholarship focuses on trying to sort of like drill at what people consider to be an objective truth about what the writer was trying to say, or like what they might have been. Do you know what I mean? And I do not I believe that there's objective truth that exists inside of us, but there's also like truth in communal forms, and truth that has like many shades of truth, right? And so I don't think it's actually very helpful sometimes to say like, yes, this is exactly, do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Um because I think that again like interrupts the relationship between the reader and the book, right? That makes it like, oh, it was about this, right? And it turns it into sort of like a debate that doesn't need to, do you know what I mean? I'm not a uh what is it, there's a specific word for it. um I'm not a fan of the school of objectivism, I guess. Right. And I because I think also that the drive for objectivism to a certain extent has like changed the way people perceive culture. I think it's made it so that it's harder for people to accept that different people have different experiences of things, right? Because people are sort of driving at this is the objective truth, right? Which, again, an objective truth is being relayed by like subjective human beings, right? So that can change how you receive, you know what I mean? So, yeah, for that reason, I will neither confirm nor deny anything in the work.
And I'm glad. I can't imagine anything more boring than objective art. Like, what a truly bland experience that would be. And something I think, I mean, Magda and I talked about this a lot because we read a fair amount of fantasy and romantasy. And like, there are always typically in those magic systems, the authors are drawing from their perspective or from their cultural experience. And like, I kind of love those little nuggets because even in some of the spirits that you were talking about in this book, I found myself going online and being like, what is the origin of this person? And that kind of engagement is really fun for the reader because you're learning, you're like, does this exist only within the world of Ife? Does it exist in the world coming from somewhere else? Those threads are fun to pull at, as a reader. So I want you to keep this attitude of not interjecting up because it's really fun for us to play this guessing game.
And I love it, and I love, and like, Magda, if you asked me and you were like, well, I'll tell you, this, if there was, I'll tell you. But sometimes like there wasn't. Sometimes my subconscious is like playing game. And like, I mean, the best writing happens like that, right? Where you're writing and then you read something you're like, I see what you were doing, brain. I see what's going on, you know. But yeah, like that's what comes out on the page, and I think it's a lot of fun, and I have a lot of fun with like having my readers just experience the book as is, and then they're just like, but I need to know, was this really a reference to us? And I'd be like, was it a reference? Or was it, it's just fun.
Your perspective and the way that you did this was so different from anything that I have ever read before. And it's not just from like a different perspective, it's also the way that you went about simple things, like simple, I call. Like one of them was the way that you referred to the time of the day by like being rabbit hour, crow hour. And I know you don't have to confirm or deny, but I don't know if that's like based on something that it's already happens in some like communities and you kind of taking inspiration from it, um, or if it's just something that you came up with and then you're just like, yeah, it just works.
There are a
But
lot of
I
Easter
love that.
eggs.
There's
Magda
a lot
found
of
even
things.
more than I did. Yeah, we really loved it.
That is a definite Easter egg. Um, so I think one thing I've been very clear about is, or you might find it in an older podcast, is so my dad and my grandfather grew up with the lunar calendar and lunar time systems. And one of the time systems, so it was one of the things where one of the questions I had a lot when I was a kid was, why do we do months and stuff like this way? Because we would attend like lunar festivals and like different things, and I'd be like, well, why do we do it like this in school? My dad would just be like, well, because they decided that we were going to follow the Gregorian calendar and stuff. And I was like, but why did the whole world decide that? And he would just be like, kid, I, I mean, sorry. Um, I wasn't there when they were deciding it, but I understand the frustration, but it is what it is, right? So that's part of what that is a definite Easter egg. It's it's a day blocked into a 2 hour time system. And it's a time system you will see in my next work as well. And part of the reason, actually, that one is actually a very fun question, because that's something that I will say I'm directly referencing, and I'm directly referencing because I want people to think of also not just about the way things are now, but the way things might have been.
Mhm.
Because again, I'm not a very fixed perspective kind of person. I am a anything is possible. Um, it just takes not just belief, but then it also takes the very unsexy work, and the work is like an everyday kind of thing. Um, but again, as somebody who is like standing in direct opposition to like there being like one objective truth and one objective way and whatever, it was like something that I was just like, oh yeah, there's no way I'm going to write a fantastical world and we're all going to operate by, you know, certain traditions. We're going to operate by different traditions. And it's something that um, in my next work you will see even more, but in a more jarring, very, very fun way. Well, we are playing with a lot of things. We're playing with not just time systems, not just understanding of um, how the day and our celestial signs and like all of that work, but how our bodies and like all of that work too.
Okay, if we can keep you for one more question, because I do want to talk about this. I told Magda, like, I was like, we're keeping her too long, but I have to know about this because you brought it up twice in the book, and it's one of my favorite things that you write about, which is Demi's relationship with more Eurocentric ideals of beauty. That gets brought up multiple times in the book. And then we, as the reader, get to see Demi on the cover. And she's stunning and beautiful, but obviously not in the context of the system of beauty that occurs within the book. And so I was wondering if you would talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So this is one of those things that is a bit complicated, but I think is just is is one of those things that like we should talk about a lot,
Yeah.
right? Which is that I think that for a very, very long time, and you can trace where these sort of ideas came from, and how they pervaded sort of our collective consciousness as human beings. Uh, and you can trace it to like certain historical events, right? Around the 17th century, right? We can say 16th, 17th century. We had some massive shifts, right? I mean, with like exploration, and first forays into sort of colonialism, right? And then like people around the 17th century, like, developing ideas about hierarchy. And hierarchy used to be sort of more of a thing of like tribesmen hierarchy and like class hierarchy, like things like that. But then also where the first ideas of like sort of like skin color hierarchy came, and not just skin color, but then you saw like early scientists trying to define whole groups of people by facial structures,
Mm,
right?
mm,
It's part of like where when you hear things like Mongolian birth spots and you're like, what? Like that's where things like that like come from. Even though like 90% of kids who have those birth spots are either of like African or Asian like descent, like mostly, yeah, like so. And but it's a very specific like. What do you mean it's a Mongolian birth spot? Which is like the name is changing now and definitely needs to. But that So anyway, we had all these like scientists who were developing ideas about how race and ethnicity worked and how that related to skin color, and basically like creating the concept of race, right? And that became very specific things. That became very specific things for people culturally, with like beauty, with features like the certain kind of nose you had, if it was like aquiline, which and here's the really funny thing about it, right? Is genetics are gonna do what they do, right? And so aquiline noses do not only show up in people with like certain heritages, right? But like the whole idea of people trying to boil down what beauty was to very specific features, like that's really where it all started sort of taking off and started having this really weird tint to it, where it became like a certain skin color, a certain like style of nose, a certain eye shape, which my god, like how are you going to dictate like eye shape when we have like so many, you know what I mean? A certain like plumpness of lip, body shape when it came to women. For men, height, right? And again, like with gender, um a certain like characteristic confirmations to gender in very specific ways, right? So whereas in history we've seen depictions of um, men where they would wear makeup, or have their ears pierced as a very normal thing or whatever, right? Now in today's world we have very different ideas of that, right? You'll see, I mean, there was like a backlash to Bangtan Sonyeondan like last year, like BTS, because like somebody made a comment about the considering BTS members to be effeminate, because they wore makeup and some of them had piercings, and other people were like, I'm sorry, what? Like they're no longer men now? Like, it's murky
Also,
and
like
messy.
David Bowie, like lots of other people have done
Exactly.
that and from
Exactly.
different culture. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so really for me in Forged and in Exile, part of why it was important to address all of this is, to a certain extent, we we replicate, and this is part of why we talk a lot about sort of unconscious thoughts and unconscious bias, right? Is we replicate the things that we see in society. Like it's like we live in a soup, and even if you like swim in the soup and you avoid like some of like the hot like bubbles, you're like, oh, I'm not any of that, I'm gonna stay in this part of the soup. You imbibe some of it, right? And one of the things I'd seen a lot, because I consider, I mean, because I consider like, blackness is a political identity that shows up in a lot of different ways across like the globe, right? It shows up in lots of different ways in skin color, it shows up in lots of different ways in like facial expression, it shows up in lots of different ways in ethnicity, where people don't even realize that a lot of black people are also are like other races and ethnicities as well, right? They just sort of like attach a label. It's sort of like, we say the word white, but I'm like, what does that mean, really? right? Does it mean that this person is Estonian, which is very, very different than someone who has like a Scots-Irish presentation, or like we say like Latinidad, right? But if you grow up in like Bogota, Colombia, you have a very, very different existence than somebody who's growing up in like Haiti, right? Or who's someone who's growing up in like Uruguay, right? It's so different, right? Um, but I really felt like what we didn't talk about is like how we, because we've imbibed some of these like cultural, like some things that we, I mean, not just cultural, but some of these like sort of like harmful perceptions like that came from the past about how we consider beauty and how beauty is defined, right? If you think about it, like 60 years ago, Norma Jean Baker, aka Marilyn Monroe, was a size 8, and that was beautiful, right? And then 20 years after that, that became fat, right? And that became no longer beautiful because fat became no longer beautiful. Do you see what I'm saying? And you know, all these definitions change for women, especially a lot, right? And particularly because of that, and particularly because people don't realize how much communities do a lot to keep certain ideas or ideals alive, whether or not they're harmful or good, right? It was really important for me to have a main character who, I mean, and you know that Ife has been divided. Ife is like a multi-varied like kingdom that has multiple different people who look multiple different ways, right? And this is actually also funny because I've had reviews where people have said like, well, they're all like this, and I'm like, oh, did you read the book? Because they're not, right?
That's one of the things you note about it is that it's an extremely varied cast of characters with
Yeah,
extremely different backgrounds within just the one kingdom. Yeah.
right. And if it has regions, but even the way people, and you'll go into it more in book 2 because you'll go to like more regions, but even the way people look in regions, it's like harder to define. It's like there's that one point in book 2 where Demi is sort of like, I mean, if you had this, this, and this, then maybe they would think this. But if you have this, this, that doesn't tell anything. So really, the way they can tell if you're an outsider is that maybe the accent or the way you speak. But if you're good at the language, then like it's harder to tell. So like they're trying to basically figure their way through a situation, and she's sort of like sorting through that herself. But yeah, so it's there are lots of different things going on there. But one of the things that was important for me to bring out was how you will have people who share a lot of similarities with you, who might police your identity and police your expression of your identity because of their own baggage and their own ideas of what that should look like, right? And that's how we sort of like conform to these hierarchical ideas that like may not have any basis in reality, like telling people that redheads were the devil, like back then, or that like twins were evil, just like things like that, right? Or that all people who ascribe to the word like black as part of their identity must have like flatter faces, or like thicker lips or whatever, or what was it? People who believe that only people of East Asian descent have monolids, which is not true. Like, sorry, I mean, oh, or like the whole like blonde hair, it only belongs to people of European descent. Sorry, not true. Not even red hair. Like, please stop with those lies. You know what I mean? Like, just go travel, and like open your eyes, and you'll see that and the thing too is I think also the assumptions of like um seeing somebody and going like, oh, they're mixed, right? And I'm like, no, they're what media and recent media has convinced you mixed looks like, right? But mix can look very different for many different people. And most mixed people do not look the way you think they look because media will only show you like 10% of what's out there. And it's, so all of that, like discussing that, like having Demi like note that, right, and having it like be something that's like brought up, right, was part of talking about how, because like at the beginning of the book you have one region that invaded the other three and that they won, right? So they got to define what beauty was, what language was, what history was. Like they basically get to rewrite everything, and it's really like hearkening or talking to like the cycle of how empire replicates itself, and it's so insidious, right? Because you have that woman at the beginning who's like selling ginger cream, who gets on Demi, who's just like, don't you want to be beautiful? And Demi's just like, I'm sorry, I can't help you, right? She just like, this is, you stay in the sunken place, like go over there. I cannot help you, right? Because she's like, I am beautiful, right? I am, and because I'm beautiful, because I'm not going to forget, right? Like, beauty is a varied thing, right? And it's not conforming to this idea, external idea, is part of seeding my agency, is part of seeding who I am, right? And it was important to me to put that in there because it's something that I think that across race, across ethnicity, um, across gender, a lot of people need to hold, need to learn to embody. I think we so often look for validation of who we are outside of ourselves. We so often are taught that, like, unless someone else validates you, your existence means nothing, right? You don't matter. And I don't think that's real or true. I think that, my dad used to tell me when I was a kid, he used to say, if you don't know what you're about, then someone else is going to tell you what you're about, right? And he would say, like, some of the first, because my dad's a physicist, retired now, but he would say some of the first physicists were thought to be mad people, right? But they believed what they believed. And so now we have all of these amazing things because they kept believing. They didn't have anyone else to show them a blueprint, right? They just had to believe themselves, right? And so he would always say, if you're waiting for somebody to tell you it's okay, then you might be waiting forever and you might not get anything. But if you are able to hold onto what you know is true and operate, with that, then you've got something to hold on to, right? So that was, that was part of what was like really, really important for me to show, not just in the book, but on the cover, right? Because I also know that it's a thing now when people will talk about how um they will avoid certain books because they'll think it's not for them. If they see a character on the cover that doesn't look like them, they will think, oh, this book is not for me. Which, to my mind, I mean, that's so strange, right? Because I grew up reading books with lots of characters that were not like me, or not even exactly, or maybe didn't even share a single thing with me, right? But I was able to read their journey and enjoy their journey and find the things we did have in common, find our common humanity. And because of that, understand more things about myself and about the world at large, right? Appreciate more things about other people at large. And I think that's a thing that we talk about now when we talk about sort of like diverse books, right? Is books that deviate from what is like pushed and popularized are not some special unicorn that you pick up when you need to learn something, right? They are books about human beings, right? And that is what makes them worthy and important. And you don't know, you could pick up a book and it's the most hilarious book you have ever read, but it's about like a Hmong woman who moves to Cambodia, and you have never been to Cambodia. You don't even know the first thing about Hmong people, but it's the most hilarious books you've ever read, and you're like, my God, bestie, that's my girl, right? And you would miss out if you didn't pick it up, right? And so yeah, that's at the heart of it. Like, that is what is like super, super important to me, right? Is having people question, and like not just question, but like think about, like, where do we get our thoughts from, right? Where do we get our definitions of like beauty? Where do we get our definitions of language and what language means, and like how language matters? Like, where do we get to decide? Like, even we were talking about this at the beginning with like the idea of basic books, right? who who decided, like, who made the litmus test to decide that some books were more deserving of being ascribed literary merit than others, right? And I mean, you could say things like, okay, this book is like illegible. Okay, that's different because I mean, we can't understand what's going on in the book. All right, that's we're not debating that. You know what I'm saying? But I think that, like, and I think you can also say things like people should read books that help them escape and read books that make them think, and like should have a balance. It shouldn't be that only good literature is seen as all the stuff that like allows us to turn our brain off. This is all the stuff that makes us like turn our brain on. It should be like everything in moderation, right? But at the same time, like, we should question where these ideas come from, right? And for me, like, beauty is one of those very quiet, insidious things that affect the way we see ourselves, the way we consider ourselves, and how we move through the world, you know? Because I think like internalizing that like your beauty is contingent on how people have been like thought to think about you will make you carry yourself in a very, very different way. So that was my all that to say, like, yeah, that's what all of that was about.
We need a moment of silence because that was spectacular. You are appointed mayor of the Literary Board of Tourism. I mean, that was incredible.
Oh gosh.
I think
Okay.
that's a great way because we brought everything back. We went a full
Mhm.
circle, and it's such a beautiful way to kind of wrap up our interview. It was so great to be able to kind of chat with you and learn more about getting all this context and more information from like what your point of view was going into this. And we were so happy to be able to kind of that you took us through this journey because it was an amazing read. And I can't wait for all of the people that are listening to this. Check the duology out. It's Tainted Blood duology. The first book is Forged by Blood, and it was just incredible. Ehigbor, thank you so much. Do you want to tell the audience where they can find you? And is there anything else that you want to tell the listeners out there?
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Magda and Lindsay, for having me. I'm still like so happy and blown away that you're on AY, Lindsay, honestly. Um, yeah, yeah. Shout out to my EY, Lindsay. You're still cool, but this AY, Lindsay just got me. That was cool. But hi, I'm Ehigbor Okosun. You can find me on Instagram at Okosun Reads. That's OKOSUNREADS. I am now also maybe shifting on to Blue Sky some because I've had an account there for a while, but I haven't done anything with it, and so maybe I'll do something with it. But I can only concentrate on one social media at a time, y'all, because I'm very like I'm one of those like if you picture like the the mad scientist writer kind of person. That's me, where I'm like I'm working on things, and so I'll like work on things and like forget that I exist outside in the world, and then I'll come back, and then I'll be like, oh, that's right, I have to update people somehow on social media. So sorry. Yeah, but yeah, give a shout out there, on Instagram. So I have, which Magda and Lindsay was so kind to feature Forged by Blood and Exiled by Iron on this podcast. So thank you so much for that. I have other books coming out as well. I have a dark romantasy on the horizon, that, according to my editor, is like nothing you've ever seen. And so we will see how that turns out. And I have a mystery thriller on the horizon as well that will be a an emotional tour de force, apparently. So we will see how that goes. Yes, so that's me. And in the future, if you ever see me at a conference or at a bookstore or something, just say hi. I'm very, very normal. Um, and bonus, if you can tell me what sailor from Sailor Moon you are. Or if you're not a sailor and you're actually just a cat or like a different character, I'm down for it. You also could tell me what Jujutsu Kaisen character you are, and that would also work. I would also be down for that. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to Literally Books, the podcast.
Where we say what we read.
And we mean what we say. Bye.